Episode 49 of the Interstice podcast, halfway almost to 100. That'll be the next one, but I'm excited. Each one of these feels like a benchmark milestone for me here. So thank you for tuning in. Welcome again. And as I say, whether it's on Spotify, whether it is on my channel that you found it, the Interstice podcast on YouTube, who cares? Thank you for showing up. We got some cool things to discuss today. Directly connected, directly flowing from the last conversation that we had in the last episode. So that's where I want to jump in right away, is talking about projects, what Garden Lab is currently up to, and how it's evolved in such a short window of time, like totally unexpected in a great way. So I was talking about last time the gear shifting that we done in terms of where at first we were working with WoW to You. I was the host of the channel there. We were making content. We've amicably concluded that relationship in that context and now gone on to that they actually are often in touch with government projects. And we'd said that if we are to continue, that's the sort of thing that we want to continue with. And lo and behold, in a very short turnaround time, they came to us with a great project. And that was to work with the city of Iwaki in Fukushima Prefecture. And this is associated with the agency in the government or department, whatever you want to call it, that is all about recovery and recovery in that area specifically because they had the nuclear disaster in Fukushima. And that was going to be a great project, because what could make me happier than being able to contribute to the recovery of a town that is already suffering from that great tragedy. And now it's like insult or injury to insult, where not only, or insult to injury, because there was a serious injury with the reactor, but now people won't come to visit you because you already suffered a tragedy, but that is no more. They've recovered from it, and we're going to help them get back on their feet. That feels great. And it was kind of amazing. So we've got this branding that we're doing now with Garden Lab, where we are a studio. It's what we were kind of doing, but now with these government projects, much more clearly so. I was joking to Drew just the other night, Drew being my boss, I'll say that because there's perhaps always a few new listeners in, boss and old friend, that it was kind of funny how we're now a studio before we've even able to like officially pronounce this, make that pronouncement at Garden Lab. But that's kind of cool too. It's like that's probably what you want. You don't want to be just in name. You want to be doing the things that actually warrants you calling yourself that. Now, what came along down the pipeline after that, which blew me away, and I couldn't believe to have occurred so quickly. We were talking about how it'd be awesome if we got maybe 3 or 4 of these projects in a year for their scale. It would be a great start to Studio Garden Lab. It would mean that in this year, we had done well. We'd got 4 projects like this, and it gave us time that we'll get through this first project with Iwaki, and then we'll move on to the next project, and that could be in a couple months. Well, after about a week, we were contacted again by WoW to You, and there is no NDA or anything like that. This is all free for us to talk about, which is awesome. And it was to approach us again for now a different government contract. And this one is, in my mind, I mean, it's equally, if not more exciting than Iwaki is. And this is associated with the Council for Foreign Affairs. And specifically, this division is dealing with something called the Tokyo VR Expo. And I love this too. It dovetails well into this sort of like more technologically savvy sort of like, we're interested in technology. We're not only interested in using it, we're interested in how us personally, I should say, using it. We're interested in how the world is using technology and how that's going to continue to evolve. And one of the things that you're seeing a lot of nowadays, especially given the state of the world right now, are these virtual, straight up VR events that are going on. And one of these VR events is called the Tokyo Vr Expo. And so what it is, the idea being that perhaps you're in the US or somewhere else and you're really, really interested to experience Japan, but you cannot come here. And so you have to do that through some other means. And virtual reality is a way to do that. So the VR Expo. You go into this VR entered room, and then on all the walls in this virtual reality room are these different UNESCO sites and places that you would hopefully visit in person, but you can't, so you're going to do it in virtual reality. And what they're trying to do is to get more site flow. They want to get people more aware that this exists, and they want to get more people in attendance. And there's a number of ways that you could promote that, but perhaps most easily and obviously would be to create some sort of other digital promotional materials. And so what they would like us to do is to go to these places that are going to be shown in the VR Expo, but they actually want us to go to the actual physical spaces and film there and create a video that says, these are the places that are going to show up in the Tokyo VR Expo. But we got to go there live. We got to go and create a promotional video of the actual spaces. Now, this is still, in a sense, somewhat virtual, but the amount of information that you're going to get exposed to and the way that we're showing it to you is like you would get in any other experience of media, where you would go on YouTube or you go to the government website and you're like, oh, the VR Expo looks cool. I wonder what I'd see at the VR Expo. Okay, it's this. And then they click our promotional video and you're off to the races. How sweet. How cool is this? It's hard for me to describe. Now, it's really fast. We're not yet a victim, but this could be the first hints of being a victim of your own success, because we need to grow incrementally, in the sense that it is absolutely a mission of ours that whatever we produce is of the highest quality. We are not interested in projects purely the money that we gain, the budget that we gain from a project is the byproduct of what is more fundamentally important, which is that we would create really, really cool shit. And so you can only create really, really, really cool shit if you actually have the time to do it justice. And that means creating a proper filming schedule, a proper shot list, taking your time when you go out to film, not rushing the edit, having a clear vision of the tonality of what it is that you want to present, all of these things. And if you took on too many projects at any one time, you can see how that would slip into disrepair. It's the sort of thing where I was talking again to Drew the other night, and it will relate to the next thing that we can discuss here, is how you'll have a group of people, creatives, and to be first noticed, first heard, to gain the funding or whatever it is that they need to continue, they will put massive effort into an initial project. So, for example, you have something like Flight of the Conchords. So if you're a little bit older, a little bit more my generation, then you'll know exactly what it is that I'm talking about. So Flight of the Conchords are these two guys from, I believe they're from New Zealand. I'm going to get killed for getting that wrong. It's not Australia. They're from New Zealand, I believe. And they were these like comedy musicians, and Flight of the Conchords, I believe that's the name of their band. And they made this show that featured their music and was kind of like, the story was how their band was trying to become successful, fictional yet not fictional. And the first season of it is awesome. The writing is amazing. All their songs are amazing and it's great, but it took them ages to get that first created. They then became popular because of how well they created that first one. And now when they created their second season, it was like, okay, we're renewed. We got this to go ahead now, but we're expected to do it in what kind of a time frame? It was a very, very, very fast turnaround. And so to expect them to have the same standard of quality in their second season as the first, well, you'd expect that they would need that amount of time for preparation again, but they simply couldn't have it. And so while the second season is still good, it simply can't measure up to the first. And so that's something that we're very, very aware of here in terms of, very, very excited to have another project and to be working this time too with like the Agency of Cultural Affairs. Like that's exactly what we want to do. We want to be ambassadors of what it is that we so love about this country in whatever way that we can. And so that's the governmental agency we want to be in contact with and building our portfolio with. But we got to be mindful of the fact that if we took on too many of these projects at once, that we're going to run into speed bumps in terms of the quality that we can output from it. But not really concerned at this point. I don't think it's overwhelming. I couldn't believe, but if it were to happen, another project would come up all of a sudden. Unless it were much further down the road, I'd be a little bit concerned about trying to produce something to the standard we want, because we're also a very small team. Like there's myself, there's Drew, but Drew's usually got to continue working on what he works on. He does a lot of consulting. That's another thing we'll touch on here soon, is in terms of Drew as a guest, to be on the podcast soon. And I think for people with a very specific interest type, they'll want to tune in for that one. But then we probably have not even direct employees, just people that we contract out. In total, we've got 5 people. So we are not a large business, especially when you consider a couple of those people are like contracting to us. It's very small. So we got to develop this carefully, produce the best that we can, and not become a victim of our own success. So with that in mind, we're going forward, but I'm really, really, really excited for it. And I was saying to Drew as well, this is what a career looks like when it's taking off. I mean, it could be more taking off, that suddenly we had projects bam, bam, bam through the rest of the year planned, but that's hard to know. And you don't, I think at this initial stage, get them quite so quickly. The rate at which we have gotten them is staggering. So even faster would be weird, but this is what it looks like. And it's really, really exciting. And it inspires me, and it makes me want to create for this podcast, as well as my own channel, as well as every single creative outlet that I have. More and more and more. That's the thing about creativity, is that once you have that momentum, the momentum that we discussed in the previous podcast, you double your work, you triple your work, you quadruple your work, and you're so excited and you're so enjoying the process that it actually feels like less of an effort than doing one thing that you're not really that invested into. So it's wonderful. Take this time now to talk about something where I'm in awe again of the creative process, and it's this incredible show. Maybe a few people have already seen it. I feel like I've come to this late. It's called Arcane. It's on Netflix right now, and it is based off of the League of Legends universe, which is, I believe you would call this a MOBA. You have a team on either end of the virtual battlefield, this being a computer game. You choose heroes that have different synergies with each other and different counters to the opposing team's heroes, and you are trying to make your way across this map to blow up either team's home base. That's kind of the idea. But Riot Games, ever expanding their influence outwards, wanted to take this universe and its rich lore and characters, and they wanted to create a show based on some of those heroes. And where so many adaptations of a property like this, like a video game property, get turned into something really crappy, you do get those occasional ones that are done really, really, really well. And this is just such a case. When I think of ones that are done well, you'd probably find something like the original Mortal Kombat. Had no business being as good as it was, but it was great. Like to this day, I swear by that movie. There was just some kind of 90s magic going on there. I don't even think it was in the 2000s yet, but a great one. And then you have, I don't care what people say about the Mario Brothers movie. I thought that was really, really cool too. It had a great, I think, darker than expected aesthetic, and that's why a lot of people weren't so into it, but I really liked it. And there are a few other examples like this. Really, really good adaptation. And this is what they got. And Arcane is a series that takes place over 9 episodes, so not too long. It features, I'm not sure the exact number of heroes from the game, but many of them, several of them. And the art style, I would say, if you're a fan of games at all, it's a sort of, what would I call this? Almost like a 1950s art aesthetic, like you would have seen in that old, very, very successful, to this day, very, very well-respected Batman. that was released, again, maybe back in the 90s. For video games, it would be something like the art aesthetic, sort of steampunk, 1950s noir, in Dishonored, that series of games, which has incredible critical acclaim and everyone respects a great deal. That's the kind of art style of it. And this, when I looked it up, it was humbling for me and oriented myself to think, okay, do not be afraid of a project that takes you more time to create. I think if I spend, say I spend 30 hours on an edit, I'm like, wow, good for you, Dave. Pat on the back. Good job, man. This series, it took 6 years. 6 years. Now, some of that is in pre-production and post-production and things that you wouldn't immediately equate to like the writing of the story and the drawing of the art and the composition of it, literally in the software that they're using to design it. But doesn't matter. It's all start to finish. These are the things that need to get done, even if they're not things that feel like directly related to the production. They are, because you got to get through storyboarding. You got to get through brainstorming. You got to get through funding. The fact that it took 6 years, I'm like, what a gamble to put nearly, over half a decade of effort into something, not knowing whether or not that thing was actually going to be successful. That's balls. That's balls. I really respect it. And I've said this to a few people now, but if I could encourage you to watch it, that's a little bit of a goal that I have here, because I'd like to not only talk about what I'm doing creatively, but point people in the direction of things that they could enjoy creatively. They understand in storytelling this very, very, very important concept of build up and payoff, action and consequence. So what do I mean by that? Well, every story written is going to have plot beats in it. And these plot beats are usually some kind of crossroads for a main character, whether it's a dilemma, it's a choice between two things, whether it is a character's development. That character has now suddenly become the head detective at an office, or they have become wealthy. If these sort of plot beats occur in a story and there was no buildup or there was no consequence, we don't care. So another example I could give of this is this happens way too much in a lot of modern movies where, how to put this? It's like they're trying to build up caring about this character by like, oh, how do I do that? Well, we'll kill one of his best friends. But if you don't know that best friend, if there hasn't been time to see the way in which that best friend impacts our main character, then we don't care. Arcane has a really, really great sense of this, and any plot beat or any character that we are to care about, they invest time in the story telling that person or that event's lead up so that when it does occur, there was a build up and there's a payoff. There's an action and there is a consequence, and you feel them. And it makes it so much better. And it allows for a more compelling pacing of a story as well. And I got to say, yeah, I had a few like best picks for 2021, the things that I enjoyed most in that year, and one of which was Midnight Mass. I feel like very few people are going to watch that on Netflix. It's incredible. And then there's Arcane. And Arcane is just about one of the coolest shows you could possibly imagine. If you're a little bit more of a kid at heart and animation is something that you can access as something you enjoy, this will be an easy sell. But I would appeal to people who don't even necessarily go in for that kind of entertainment, that kind of media. I think that this is a good portal because it shows that good writing and impactful storytelling is not limited to live action. They've been doing it for ages, infinitum, over in Japan, but now we're really seeing when Western artists get their hands on this kind of thing that we can do it justice as well. We used to more. There were darker animated stories that were told with more adult themes, I would say back in the 80s, but those sort of fell out of vogue as the more mass consumable, less dark sort of animation that came out of Disney and Pixar started to become more prevalent. The one that I would name number one that I would suggest for people if they're like, oh, well, what's he talking about? I haven't seen this before. It would be The Secret of Nim. The Secret of Nim is, I got to watch it again. And in fact, my gaming channel, my short-lived gaming channel that I had for a while, was inspired. The Great Owl is actually a character from that movie. It's something Bluth, I believe, is the director of those. But if you're looking for something, the progenitor of these kind of video projects, then I would suggest checking out The Secret of Nim. And Nim stands for, and this is funny, I only came to understand this many years later, the National Institute of Health and Medicine. But at the time I was like, ooh, it just sounds like some sort of magical institution, you know, like the school of Harry Potter or something like that. Incredible stuff. And I really wanted to highly recommend that to anybody who needs a little background before they jump into Arcane, to see where like maybe this came from. But I think I've definitely identified as well some of the other influences by talking about Dishonored, by talking about that original Batman that was so popular in the 90s as well. Just some great inspiring media. And I've talked about that before in previous podcasts about how if you want to get good ideas for your own art, that you've got to experience other art. That's really important. And something we need to make time to do. I think it was I was making a video specifically actually on how to get out of a rut. And I was talking about going out and seeing 1917, that incredible newish movie. It's only like a couple years old now, 1917. If you haven't seen that one either, go do yourself a favor and go check out 1917. What else is happening? What are we thinking of for Garden Lab? I want to talk about other projects here. It would be the coolest thing. I don't know when it'll happen, but if I ever had someone who listened to the podcast who was able to come to like some of the Garden Lab events, that would be super cool. I would really like that. There's this awesome artist. His name is Ali Mobs, and he creates this instrumental. I don't want to sell him short by saying like lo-fi hip hop, because he'd probably say, oh, no, that's too one-dimensional to describe me in that way. But just to give you a point of reference for the sort of music that Ali's making, very popular musician here in Japan. Great stuff, great vibe. We're going to be featuring him in February as one of the events that we have going on at Garden Lab. And I think that that's going to be a lot of fun to get him in there. The last one that we did with the incredible pianist, Sylvester, was a huge hit. Who cares if I mentioned it before in the podcast, but when he came over, I was like assessing his style, and I was like very primary, cool colors, explosions. He plays like a Famicom Nintendo MIDI music. Let's bring over all his plushies. So we're trying to look at what kind of options we have for getting Ali in and seeing like how can we complement his style? What would that look like? That's really exciting. So I want to do a little like pre-hype for guests as well. What do we got? Yeah, 7 minutes to talk about this. So it'll be cool. And then we'll go into the second half of the podcast. So first of all, bless his heart, incredible guy, Caden. Caden is someone I've worked with, really open-minded, incredibly like self-taught everything. He is the graphic designer that has done a ton of work on my channel. And if you'd listened, as soon as I say that name, you'd be like, oh, I remember him. Dave always talks about him. I'm actually going to get him to come on his Thursday, my Friday, for an episode of this podcast. So the 50th episode, in fact, will feature Caden. And I'm really excited to have him on because he's another one of these self-directed people with the help of others. No man is an island, and we're always like lifting each other up and helping each other along. But we are doing a great service to ourselves if we're able to self-educate along the way. And that's all Caden's done. All of the graphic design that he knows, it's all self-taught, never went to any lessons. I was talking to him today because he helped me design my website, and talking to him about like updating that and working on a bunch of stuff. And so he knows website design. He just got back from the military in the US where he was doing like that basic level of training, boot camp or whatever it is. Making myself sound ignorant here to not know exactly. But basically you become like in Canada, a reserve troop that because you went through that training, they could call on you to do something. But if they don't, they're now giving you access to health insurance in America, which is quite important. And then in addition to that, they'll help pay for your education. So he's going to use that to pay for even more education. So he's got this really interesting experience of the US military very recently in his life. And then there's all this effort that he's made to self-educate, which I think will make him a really, really interesting guest to have on. And we were already talking about the work that he's going to do with me again. We're starting up, revamping the website and bringing that into 2022, since I believe the last time we worked on it together was in 2020. So I like always all of these channels that I create along to continue to evolve. No cover page should remain the same for 1,000 years, maybe yearly. Come up with something new, keep innovating, creating, evolving, because your skill set, if you're living right, is going to be getting better year by year. So you should be able to update what it is that you have. Just before going into the second portion of this, I want to talk about Drew. So Drew came on as one of the very first guests that I had on the podcast, and I've invited him to come on again. And where before we had Drew coming in, or actually I've had him twice, maybe this will be the third time, where he was on before to talk about what is Garden Lab, what is this sort of like work culture that we're trying to seed there. He is very much involved with, and all of this is above board. I'm not, there's no NDA again, that anything we discuss, he'll be free to discuss. He is associated with the Cardano blockchain. So if there was actually not a statistic, but a poll done recently by Vitalik Buterin, who is of many things. He's the founder of the Ethereum blockchain. And Ethereum is basically second only in market cap, I believe, to Bitcoin. And he had a poll, Vitalik had a poll, and he was asking, you wake up, it's 2035, and if you were to have all of your transactions processed on a blockchain, which would you like it to be? And there were all of these different polls of what you could choose from. And Cardano, by something like 80% Cardano. That's a little bit of hyperbole, but Cardano was the clear winner of the votes, the Cardano blockchain, and by some significant portion of something like 600,000 votes that were taken. So pretty significant, cool little poll, and a little bit of a taster of how Cardano was really finding his footing, and really, really, really fascinating, because Cardano, if you were unaware, Cardano is actually, it's Charles Hodgkinson, I believe, is the CEO of it. And Vitalik was the originator of the Ethereum chain, but worked closely with Charles Hodgkinson's when it was first created. So Charles was actually one of the original bros working on Ethereum, that he, though, then wanted to continue to evolve the technology and was not content yet with the state of it where the Ethereum blockchain was, and so went on to create Cardano. Cardano, I think, could be considered a third generational chain. I won't go into the like gritty details here. We could get into this with Drew, but essentially like the difference between proof of work and proof of stake. So I'm going to have Drew on, and we're going to talk all about Cardano and all about ADA. That's part one. Let's jump into part two. Part two. Now, I just said I'm gonna go and betray myself here. I just said that we'd move on to part two, but I think I actually want to give greater context to why Drew's role in Cardano is significant, because he's not simply some entry-level dude. He's actually having a quite significant impact on how the chain is developing overall, and of course, especially in Japan. So I've gone over it before, and we'll have Drew on, and I'll give like a whole like resume background, which is remarkable. The guy's remarkable, and which has led him to work on this now. But just to give some sense, and I'm not tossing anyone under working with Cardano right now, like under a bus or anything, but it's only a compliment. of what Drew's been able to succeed in. The man has great vision. Where there was a lot of things in Japan that Cardano was trying to accomplish, and they weren't reaching those goals. It was a little bit of ice, so to speak. And since Drew has come on board with them, through not just him, he would be the first to acknowledge like the great effort of his teammates that he's working with, but he, in conjunction with a great team, have been able to have success and have so many milestones in a short period of time, or short-ish, I would say, like a half a year or whatever it was, that Cardano had been struggling to succeed with for quite some time. Once Drew was in the room, on the ground, working to make the blockchain succeed in the country, suddenly the ice was thawing, and it was going very, very well. So he's having more and more success with that, and I would just love to have some of his insights here for those who are particularly interested in the crypto space. This is a guy who can offer a really, really interesting perspective on all of that, which is awesome. And not to mention, he's one of my oldest, dearest friends, so I'm more than happy to have him onto the podcast. So watch for episode 51. We'll make that 51 because first Caden will be coming on, but then we'll have Drew on after that. We're getting some incredible light through the shoji right now in my apartment. I love this winter light that's coming through. There you go. 10 seconds of the podcast dedicated to talking about light, which you cannot see unless you're watching on the YouTube channel. Anyways, so the other thing I wanted to talk about, it's a cool experience, but it lends itself to kind of a greater theme that's going on. So recently, I had my birthday. It was January 6th. And I was born in 1985, so I'm 37 years old now. 30s, the new 20s, 40s, the new 20s, 50s, the new 20s, depending on how things go. I just saw the first or like second tier trials for the mRNA cancer vaccine going through. So that's good news for rejuvenation and just lasting a little bit longer. When I turned, tangent, gone. When I had my birthday recently, one of the things that we kind of unofficially did for that birthday was we went to the orchestra, and it was not just any orchestra. We went to the live orchestra performance of Fantasia, and I grew up with that. I listened to, of course, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. That was the one that really sticks out in my mind, and had some sense of it when I was younger, but after I went there, after we went to Osaka, we got suited up. It's on my Instagram. We got the like suited up shot of us all together going out to the orchestra for the birthday. I realized that there was a lot of this music that I'd never actually ever listened to before. And that was really, really cool because a lot of both the animation that I saw, because they were putting the animation up behind the orchestra, the animation that I saw and the music that I heard, it was a first time for me, and that made it even more exciting. And this was sort of vaguely related to my birthday. It was on the 7th. My birthday was on the 6th. And so I was like, that's for my birthday. And I feel like it was somewhat because one of my buddies got the ticket for it. It's one of the best birthdays I've ever had in my entire life. And I was struck by a couple things that we'll work through here. So first off, relates totally to the experience at hand that I had there. So when I was sitting there and listening in the first while that the music started to play, it dawned on me that I made this post on my Insta. I think I said that already, talking about this a bit. It dawned on me that I love music, A. B, I've gone to modern concerts of some really cool bands. Who would they be? I've seen Thornley. I've seen the Gorillaz. I went and saw Audio Slave, which, peace be upon him. Chris Cornell, gone from us far too soon. That was so sad. I saw great live musical performances, but in the context of a modern band. That's how I experienced it. Where that's totally different, I immediately realized when I'm listening to these orchestral instruments played live and together all as one. And I never would have appreciated, and you can't until you go to one of these things live, to notice that what you were hearing out of the speakers in terms of classical music, in terms of orchestral classical music, is a dim shadow of what it is like when you were actually present in the room with that reverberation, that vibration of all of these instruments playing together. It completely transforms the sound. I was talking about quality with a friend, but I was like, I think people will be confused when I say quality as in talking about it in good or bad, but more like the quality of something being thick or thin, where the quality of it is totally changed when you are there. And it awoken in me this realization that, oh, apparently I like the orchestra. I had no idea. Now, was it especially cool because it was Fantasia that we went to see? Yes, of course. Of course it was, because Fantasia is especially cool. But I now know that I could go probably to any variety of orchestral performances and would absolutely like it. And so this will then now link to the next point that I'm going to make, which is I would never, ever have gone to an orchestra if it were not for my friend who is really, really into this stuff. So Alessandro de Beldegarde, what would I call him? He's like a New York Italian who has now lived in Japan for X number of years, somewhere approaching 10, and all of it in Kyoto. So as a cinemaphile, that's what he is. He's a director, and he also loves musical scores, and so he knew that he loved this. But then he took that a step further because he's so passionate about this kind of stuff that he has actually gone to orchestras and appreciated them. This is something he likes. Because of his interest, I got exposed to this kind of thing, and I would never have become exposed to this kind of thing if he were not my friend, kind of illustrating the point that if you desire to have truly new experiences, having friends with a varietous interest in many different things, specifically other than your own, is really, really cool. And that's going to help get you access to these kind of experiences. And there's nothing wrong with if your friends do all the things that you like to do. So if you like to play cards, you want to build Legos, you want to make movies, whatever it is, but there's a great advantage in that you not be so homogenous in all of your passions, because it's that lack of homogeneity that is going to expose you, as I say, to this new thing. So he's never played paintball before. I'll go and take him to play paintball, and he'll have his mind blown by that, and he never would have unless he had met me. I will go to the orchestra. I will have my mind blown by that. And I never would have experienced anything like that without meeting him. So an homage to friends, an homage to the orchestra in general, because it's now definitely something that I want to experience more of. And an homage to having friends that are dissimilar to yourself, at least in some significant ways. I think it's great to be similar in a lot, because that can be the bridge that you first cross to meet each other, as, you know, like you have something in common and then can do things together. But it is so wonderful when we are not so alike that we can't experience new things with each other. And this was definitely up there with one of the coolest things I've ever done in my entire life. And, you know, the tickets weren't cheap, but they weren't too expensive either. They were about $80 for a ticket. And it was a significant event. As I said, I kind of put this in the context or the framing of I'm doing this for my birthday. So it felt like $80 was a warranted expense. And yeah, we were just buzzing afterwards. We came out of there, and I think it was pretty unanimous. Drew was one of the people who attended as well. And if I'm not mistaken, it was his first experience at a live orchestra as well. And he felt the things I was talking about when I said it's just, you cannot take what you hear from a speaker as representative of what this music is actually like. You got to sit there in the room and you got to feel it. And he felt very much the same way. So staggeringly cool experience, making the argument for having friends dissimilar to yourself, searching out friends like that. Not you could look at it like I'm specifically friends with this person because I have nothing in common with them, because it's that lack of commonality, which means that we're going to do new stuff, and that new stuff is going to be insightful and inspiring and interesting and wonderful to take part in. So Fantasia, Drew as a guest, and then other things in excitement land that we're going on to now, where I think I've finally, this is touching a little bit as I had on the previous podcast, but something that I'm very, very excited for as we evolve the studio at Garden Lab. It's going to require new equipment, and I'm very, very excited to procure some of this new equipment. And I've had my eyes, basically, I can speak definitively on two bodies. We're going to go with, which I feel is really me, really defines well kind of my experience as I've developed my skill set. And that is to get the Sony A74. It's the newest body that's been released by them, which is a hybrid shooter. You have three lines. We'll talk about this. I'm a tech nerd, so let's get into a bit of this tech. If it is A7 and then only followed by a number, so A7, 1, 2, or 3, or 4, this specifically refers to the line of cameras that is involved with hybrid shooting. That is to say, the sort of shooting where you were interested in stills, but you're not going fully down that path. You were interested in video, but you were not going fully down that path. So you want to be able to kind of like pull off both. Like you're going to go and meet a model, you're going to shoot stills with her, but then you also want to film an Instagram reel. So you want to have good video capabilities while you're out there as well. Perfect for you. And that is why I would choose that for me specifically. But because we're doing this other studio work right now, we need a videographer's camera. And a videographer's camera is definitely the Sony A7S III. Whenever you hear S in the model description for the Sony mirrorless cameras, that's referring to their video line. So it might not be so good at stills, but it's going to excel when it comes to videography, the video that you would take with it. And the problem with that, I'm discovering as I was looking around on the internet the other day, was that, well, there's a chip shortage. And I think that this has again to do with the state of the world currently, where supply chains have been disrupted. And it means that if you're interested in getting one of these Sony A7S IIIs, they're either on back order or they're simply not in stock whatsoever, with no intention to get more new stock. And so when I was looking around, that was a little bit disheartening. But once the ice thaws, then I'll be looking up for one of those as well. And then finally, what I would like to get is they've got the new DJI Mavic 3 that was released, and probably getting the Cine version of that because it shoots its video in RAW, which gives you a lot of post-production flexibility in the terms of the sort of color grading that you're going to do. And that is something I'm very, very interested in. If I were talking about future goals for my own personal development, coloring is something I'm so interested in. Just behind me here on the computer, I have DaVinci Resolve. I specifically have DaVinci Resolve because it's like the go-to powerhouse color grading. There's color grading and color nannying, and I can't remember. Color correction and color grade. One of them is where you actually affect the colors. The other is more dealing with the luminance of the different light values within the image that you're looking at. So that just means how bright or dark are each one of the light values. So you've got like your shadows. How bright or dark are your shadows? How bright or dark are your highlights? And that's what the other element of it deals with. So the other things, talking about gear, which you can expect to see evolving what it is that I create. That's actually why I talk about it too, because if you're following along closely enough to follow along with the podcast, then you're probably a little more tuned in than the average viewer that shows up to see what it is that I'm creating. So I think it might be cool for you to know the gear that's powering it. And so we got those two new bodies that are coming in pretty shortly. I'm going to be, so with the color thing, like, why did I even bring that up? Well, I noticed there's this one guy who seems like a fantastic resource for education if you want to do your coloring in DaVinci Resolve. Um, Sort of like a Middle Eastern name, but again, I don't want to be totally ignorant here. I'll just look it up afterwards. I won't even say who it is, but really, really determined guy. Clearly, I mean, it's his commercial job. He's a colorist. It's what he does, and he uses DaVinci Resolve. And I've noticed in his house, I was like, dude's got a pretty killer setup, and he's working with more than a keyboard and a mouse to be able to do this. And so I wondered, what exactly are these things? Although I could kind of anticipate before I looked them up. He just has these panels in front of him, and I was like, what is going on with this? So I was looking up just the other night, in fact, what this could be. So what it is they're basically coloring panels. And what these things allow you to do is there is the Black Magic. That's the company that makes DaVinci Resolve. Black Magic also produces these proprietary coloring devices, which you can then use to manipulate the color on the screen and to manipulate it through this board as opposed to through your keyboard and mouse. And what the benefit of that is that where with a keyboard and with a mouse, you're doing these quite kind of hack and slash adjustments where if I want it to be slightly more blue or slightly more orange or whatever, that you're using the mouse and you're dragging it, and you can only be so accurate as your hand is, and it's kind of semi-inaccurate. Or you've got on the keyboard, you've got left and right, you've got upscale, you've got up the slider, down the slider, and these are like kind of chunkily done. They don't feel smooth, where it's either dials on these panels or they'll have these sort of like trackpad balls that you can use. And so they're a far more fluid design, a far more fluid interaction between you and the lever that you're trying to press in terms of how hard you're pressing it. So if I use like a volume knob, there's a real fine-tuned adjustment that you can do when you're using that volume knob. And just in the same way, when you're using one of these trackballs, there's really like fine-tuned adjustments you can make as you roll the ball, as opposed to use something like the mouse. So that's going to make a huge difference to what it is that I would do with my coloring. But that's sort of, maybe we call this stage 2, because I actually haven't even jumped into DaVinci Resolve yet. I only know how to do coloring in Lumetri, which is what you would use in Adobe Premiere Pro. Great, does a lot of stuff, but there's, as far as I understand it, as far as I can see when I look out and in, the people who are producing on DaVinci Resolve are like way more serious about the coloring that they're doing. And I would love to get more into that. I love color science, and I love that whole field. And then to get that extra degree of control, I would love to get involved with one of these panel systems that they have available for you. And one of the other things I was actually, when I was watching reviews of it the other day, which I was like, ooh, that makes sense too. I can just describe this if you're not watching on the YouTube channel itself. So I got this like nice big monitor that I got because I do all this editing, and it's a 34-inch ultra wide. It's great. So one of my complaints when I was editing before is that the screen real estate that I had meant that when I was looking at my preview, that it's not so large. So I'm like, I'm kind of looking at the preview, but I don't even really know if I can't tell if it's representing accurately what I'm going to see when I can finally full screen this later. So what you get to do with one of these panels for DaVinci Resolve when you're doing your coloring is that you don't need to see anything on the screen other than the picture to be able to manipulate the color of it, because all of those things are on the board itself. So you can see that it says contrast here, it says midtones here, it says so on and so forth. And so you can put the image full screen. I can put the panel that I'm interested in editing the coloring of on this screen, full screen, and then manipulate the board. So you're just so much more aware of what it is that you're actually doing to the overall image, as opposed to it being tucked away in some little corner of your screen where you're like, I think the color's being affected in this way, and I I think I'm doing this with the contrast. I'm not totally sure, though. I guess we'll wait until I render this and then find out that I have to come back and spend, another dozen hours or so correcting a mistake that would have been not the case, would have not come to occur had I been able to look at it in full screen. That's pretty rapid fire, trying to explain what that panel would be useful for, but I hope that makes some sense to you. I'm really, really excited about that. The final other piece of tech that we'll be bringing into our production studio is, of course, to do with audio, because just as I'm speaking to you now, I'm not making a podcast on just, a tiny little microphone. I'm using a proper microphone because audio is so important, and audio is no less important in video production. It's fundamental. There's a really cool story of like the guy who made the very successful Shazam movie, very successful DC movie Shazam. He came from YouTube. He was like producing little short films on YouTube. He's an incredible success story. And he then went on to be hired as a director for DC and made the very, very successful Shazam. But he would still do these videos on his YouTube channel of what it was that he valued about creating films, what it's actually like, what are the realities of this. And he does this example of which matters more to you. And so he does these two polar videos, one of which has horrible video but perfect audio, and then the other has crap audio but the video looks perfect, like 8K or something like that. I think you sort of intuitively have guessed that the one which was kind of tolerable and you'd probably watch through anyways was the one that had good audio, and it didn't matter how good the image quality was. If the audio was shite, then people would immediately not want to watch the video anymore. So really illustrating just how important it is that you have good audio. So we are going to get a proper lavalier, whatever you call them, mics for the interviews that we'll be doing into the future with Garden Lab, because most certainly when we go to Iwaki, we have these interviews that are scheduled for us. I'm assuming for the Kyoto VR, we'll probably speak with somebody who's responsible for public relations there, and we'll have to mic them up. And we can no longer do it with like, it's cool, I've got the Rode mic on top of my camera right now. That's great and everything, but it's not like documentary level sound by any stretch of the imagination. That's why I don't use that mic. That's why I use the mic in front of me here for the audio that I'm doing. And it would be no different for interviews. We'd either want a boom mic above them, or we'd want a lav mic pinned to their collar or something to get proper audio, because you can't have any background sound. It's going to lower the whole production value of the entire thing. And Lord knows that we just can't have that if we're going to be taken seriously with the kind of videos that we want to produce. So very, 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 very excited to have all this coming down the pipeline, but of course, all in due time, because as I say, there's the chip shortage that would prevent me from actually, getting the A7S III. So it's meant that I have to get the 7.4 first, and all these and that and the other thing, shenanigans. But anyways, that's a snapshot. Here we go to more consistent episodes going up. Again, all I can say is thank you. If you'd like to follow me on my socials, that's basically my Instagram. That's the one to go to. It links to everything that I'm usually doing. Beyond that, if you'd like to support me more wholly, that would be on my Patreon. My Patreon is just davetrippin. You can look that up easily enough. Thanks to you who are already supporting me there. I appreciate that so much. There is my website if you would like to check out the blog posts that I do, because there's always something. I was telling myself that I should write one up today. I think that I still may. The blog posts that I do there, which are related to the projects and give greater insight into the kind of another insight into the creative process that's creating what I do on my channel and will be doing for Garden Lab. And that about wraps it up. So thank you very much tuning into this episode. If you're on Spotify or one of these Google places, I hear that leaving a review is very, very helpful in terms of getting greater exposure. I haven't even checked that out, but if you can, please do it. Please, if you got a positive thing to say, share that with the world. It goes a long way. In the meantime, I'm going to get back to work. Hug the ones you love. Look after them. They're very important. And I will catch you in the next episode with Caden, and we'll talk about self-motivated, self-directed learning and education. But that's all for now. Peace.